that I was critical of Biden. I thought it set a terrible precedent at the time because I think Trump is going to now preemptively pardon everybody. Well, Biden did it. But you know what? In retrospect, Biden was right. I mean, these guys are just going after anyone that they view it. I don't know why they view Fauci as such an enemy. They're so scared to blame Trump. They blame the people around him. It's always somebody else and not Trump's fault. I've talked a lot, as you know, about weaponization and about how this administration has so clearly weaponized the Department of Justice. And when I say weaponized, I've said this before, it ends up losing a little bit of its power because, so many on the far right tried to claim that everything was weaponized, right? Every prosecution of Donald Trump was weaponized, et cetera. I had a congressman, a Republican, on the show a couple weeks ago, and I had made the point that I thought that the prosecutions of Donald Trump by Alvin Bragg and by Fani Willis shouldn't happen, right? And that I supported Garland's initial decision not to prosecute Trump for the, January 6th stuff, even though in all of these cases there was wrongdoing. And that's the key, right? I had different reasons for thinking that different cases shouldn't be brought. The one that, is impossible to overcome for them is the documents case, right? Because he was lying about it. He was just lying about retaining documents with classified markings. And again, for those of you not paying attention who think, oh, well, Trump could have declassified them because he was president. Again, he didn't. But even if he had, it didn't change what the request was, which was not for classified documents. It was for documents with classified markings on it. So regardless of whether you think they were declassified or not, that's what the documents were. And these are the government's documents. They don't belong to Donald Trump. All right. So I give that background on my view of the kind of the word weaponization to say that nothing that happened in the Biden administration is remotely close to what's happening here. Right? What's happening here is they're picking enemies and trying to find potential crimes. Mortgage cases, going back into old mortgage records. Remember, Trump wasn't charged criminally in that mortgage case. With all of the fraud that he was supposedly engaged in, people forget this. The Manhattan DA didn't prosecute Donald Trump for the fraud. And that's what led to some people in his office getting upset and angry and saying, well, we've got the case, we've got him on fraud. And Alvin Bragg decided not to bring it. The only reason, in my view, he ended up bringing the second case was when one of those prosecutors wrote a book criticizing Trump for not bringing the case. The heat was on, so Alvin Bragg figured out this other campaign finance nonsense to bring a case about. So the difference is that there is no doubt that Donald Trump was engaged in wrongdoing. Now, whether he should be charged criminally, again, this is a separate question, but what he did leading up to January 6th and on January 6th was wrong. It was terrible. And what he did with the documents was wrong. What he did after the election in an effort to overturn it based on nonsense, once he knew he'd lost, once he'd lost the legal challenges, was horrible. But you can ask yourself the question, okay, but, should we charge still? And the reason that I thought that, at least with regard to the January 6th stuff, that he should get a criminal pass was because he's the former president. So I come back to this point that this congressman made on the show when I said to him, look, because I was complaining about how they're targeting Trump's enemies. And I said, keep in mind, I'm a guy who thought that the Alvin Bragg case shouldn't have been brought, the Fani Willis case shouldn't have been brought, and that I initially supported Garland's initial decision not to prosecute Trump for trying to overturn the election. And his answer was, well, those seem like a pretty big deal for you to say those cases shouldn't have been brought. And now you're saying these cases, and why aren't they comparable? The reason they're not comparable is James Comey didn't do anything wrong. He put some seashells out. The claims of mortgage fraud, when you actually dig into them with Letitia James, don't hold. Again, I was someone who was outspoken against this prosecutor, Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore, who was claiming it was racism that they were coming after her for mortgage issues. And yet they had her and a jury found her guilty. That's not what we're talking about here. Here we're talking about Bill Pulte going back and trying to find the mortgage records of Adam Schiff. And it's like, find Trump's enemies. Okay, now let's go look and see if we can find a crime. There is no doubt that's happening. And that didn't happen. It was just the opposite with the Biden administration, meaning Merrick Garland had decided not to prosecute Trump. The only reason he ended up getting prosecuted was because of the documents. And then a special prosecutor was appointed both for Trump and Biden. So this idea that, they went after Trump. No, they didn't. A lot of people on the left were upset they didn't go after him enough and fast enough. And if they'd gone after him in 2021, he probably would have been convicted. But they didn't. And instead, there's this like tit for tat game. It's not comparable. The reason I bring this up today is that they're continuing to do this now with regard to Anthony Fauci. Fauci should be charged for lying. Fauci lied. It's like, look, you can disagree with things Anthony Fauci said and not go into this nonsensical claim. Tulsi Gabbard has released these documents that they don't prove anything. You go through every single one of the claims. They want to charge Anthony Fauci, literally, but he was pardoned preemptively by Biden. Now, again, those of you who listen to the show regularly will know that I was critical of Biden. I thought it set a terrible precedent at the time because I think Trump is going to now preemptively pardon everybody. Well, Biden did it. But you know what? In retrospect, Biden was right. I mean, these guys are just going after anyone that they view as, I don't know why they view Fauci as such an enemy. That's the crazy thing. So I'm going to quickly go through the allegations that have been made about Fauci. And then I'm going to play you something that Comer said today about this. Because, again, it's important. Facts matter, right? You hear this, why is this not being covered? Why is Tulsi Gabbard's blockbuster information not being covered more widely? Why? Because at best it's ambiguous. So she claims that these newly declassified, documents show that Fauci lied when he said he didn't speak to U.S. intelligence agencies about the COVID-19 virus. And she says that it proves that he was in frequent contact with intelligence officials. Well, it depends on what you interpret Fauci having said was, meaning the documents released, this like internal stuff, this whistleblower stuff. But Fauci's testimony that they're talking about was pretty clear that he was focusing on whether he participated in intelligence briefings or investigations and not just general correspondence with them. And this is the gotcha effort. So you see, we proved that you didn't prove anything. You've proved that Anthony Fauci had correspondence with some intelligence officials. There's nothing to indicate that he was talking about that as opposed to whether he participated in intelligence briefings. But regardless, it's not like he was ever saying, well, I didn't talk to anybody. And what is Fauci's motive? They have this like sense that he's the evil boogeyman. What was Fauci's goal here? Oh, well, he wanted to cover up for the actual real source of COVID-19. And again, that's one of the other allegations, right? The question was, did Fauci use taxpayer dollars to fund what are called gain-of-function experiments on bats at the Wuhan Institute. Now, and this connects to the question of whether we know definitively that it was a lab leak or whether it was natural. So it is true that the Institute under Fauci of Allergies and Infectious Disease funded research at Wuhan. And they did it through a nonprofit called EcoHealth Alliance. But the debate is whether this specific research actually is defined as gain of function under legal and scientific definitions, right? Fauci said that it wasn't actually gain of function. But regardless, can you think of anything more sort of pedantic and sort of eggheady than debating, how much of gain? Because the only real question, right? The only reason it would be relevant is if A, we knew that it was a lab leak, B, that it had come from this research. And that's the key, is there's nothing to indicate, even if you believe it was a lab leak, that it came from this research. And C, that's why Fauci would have wanted to cover it up, right? But A doesn't relate to B, right? I mean, Gabbard is claiming that Fauci, was using his influence in the intelligence community to push for the idea that it occurred naturally in order to sort of cover up for the actual origin of it, which of course Fauci has denied. And look, there is a split in the scientific community about what the cause was, right? I think the FBI and maybe the Department of Energy, I'm not sure, have said it was a lab leak. Many in the intelligence community and many in the scientific community think it's still is more likely of natural origin. But I love the level of definiteness that so many non-experts have, right? This absolutely was a lab leak. It's you're not an expert, dude. Neither am I. I will tell you that in the very early days, when people were mocking the possibility of a lab leak, I was one of the people saying publicly, this is a real possibility. And it still is. But the idea that there was this grand conspiracy from Anthony Fauci because he lied about whether there was this gain of function research being done at Wuhan, which no one alleges actually was the cause. He lied about that. And so he wanted to cover up what the real origins of this were so he wouldn't get into trouble. So he convinces the intelligence agencies to lie about that. I mean, it's all sort of crazy. These are classic scientific debates that have been politicized. And again, I am look, I've had scientists on the show who've said they think Fauci's wrong. Okay, I get it. You think it's gain of function. Okay, other people don't agree. But there's nothing about this which is clear. There's nothing about this that shows that Fauci engaged in crimes. Nothing. And yet here we are once again. And by the way, I'm going to take your calls on this at 866-967-6887. But here we are once again talking about Anthony Fauci. Why? Well, because Tulsi Gabbard released these documents and made a big deal about it. Now, it's interesting, of course, that in the conservative media, the people who don't want to really talk about Iran will want to talk about something like this, right? Change the subject. Don't focus on the thing that's bad for the president. And by the way, listen carefully to a lot of particularly the media critics of the president. They're so scared to blame Trump, they blame the people around him. Oh, he's gotten bad advice. Oh, Israel convinced him. Oh, it's always somebody else and not Trump's fault. But this is what this feels like. And now, as this administration has politicized the DOJ in a way we have never, ever seen before. It seems that some, like James Comer, who is a leading Republican in Congress, now are saying it's not enough. We want to be able to weaponize it even more, and suggesting now that the Biden pardons should be deemed to be invalid. Here he is on Fox Business with Maria Bartiromo. I think this is from, it's either today or yesterday. I'm just looking up the date. Anyway, but I think it's from today. Let's play it.
The pardon is legitimate if, in fact, it was done by the auto pen. I mean, that's the question now. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I don't think it's so much the auto pen as it is the fact that there were never any meetings that Joe Biden had with his staff on these pardons. The only pardon that Joe Biden signed was for his son, Hunter Biden. But let's take the auto pen off the table. I know there's a lot about the auto pen. I don't want that to be the defense. The defense is there were never any scheduled meetings on his calendar. There was not a single person involved in the pardon process, in the decision making on who authorized the auto pen that ever met with Joe Biden and discussed the individual pardon. So there's no evidence Joe Biden had any decision making in the pardon process. So I think that alone is more than enough evidence to declare all the pardons issued by Joe Biden in the last day of his presidency null and void.
That is one of the dumbest things that I have ever heard. The idea that the pardons should be null and void because we don't have evidence that he had meetings about them. So suddenly, what this administration has claimed is the absolute power of the president to pardon. You actually now, according to Comer, have to have meetings on the books to show that you debated it and discussed it. Trump isn't using the pardon attorney in the way he's supposed to. He's not having the pardon attorney review all of the cases and then making a recommendation. He's pardoning his friends. He's pardoning his allies. That's worse. I mean, I would argue that Biden being, let's even assume Biden was somehow unaware. I mean, I guess he's saying that Biden, we have to now prove that Biden was involved in the decision-making process. I mean, it is so dumb. And yet here we are. And anytime there is a mistake, anytime there is an error, what this administration and its allies do is they go on the offensive. I mean, look at the reflecting pool, right? What a disaster that thing is. It's not a huge deal in the big scheme of things, but it's a disaster in the sense that, it was supposed to be almost no money. It's cost a lot more. And then apparently the felon who owned the business got a no bid contract, was, the company that did it certainly didn't do a very good job. And so instead of accepting, oh God, it's now, it's vandals. It's vandals. We're going to go after the vandals, including like ABC's Jonathan Karl, because he was reporting and showing what was happening to the pool. And here's Jeanine Pirro this weekend, again, just deflecting from the reality that they screwed this thing up big time.
President Trump's got a Crime Stoppers tip for you. He says lightweight ABC reporter Jonathan Karl was seen sticking his hand into the pool and trying to rip the rubber off the surface. Judge, is Jonathan Karl from ABC in trouble?
Well, it depends. Anyone who is in a position of vandalizing or attempting to vandalize the reflecting pool will face the criminal justice system in D.C. Look, the president has made it a priority to make D.C. not only safe, but beautiful. And there are several citations that have been handed out to individuals. And these are cases that will be prosecuted to the full extent.
Of course, to the fullest extent. We must prosecute these. Why don't they prosecute the guy who screwed up the pool? I mean, come on. So, look, you guys can tell I am so frustrated with the politicization of our legal system by this administration. And we have never seen anything like it. And Fauci's the latest target. And the problem is that he got pardoned. So 866-967-6887 is the number. Let's go to Ray in Florida. Ray, how you doing? What do you got?
How's it going, man? Long time listener, first time caller over here.
Thank you.
No, I heard you last week, and it was some different callers, and it's all based on this idea of like the truth can hit them right in the face, and they still won't believe it. It's the craziest thing. I remember almost 10 years ago, people started talking about the flat earthers, and they used to be like, "Come on, you guys are crazy." But the longer it becomes, the more believable it becomes, and it's like, how can you believe certain things? And even with the whole poll stuff, right? You can see that they messed it up, but they don't want to come to reality. They don't want to come to the truth. They don't want to accept it, because accepting the truth means that they're wrong. And it's like, it's okay to be wrong. Sometimes it's okay to be wrong.
Not for this administration. They will never, ever admit they were wrong. I mean, look at the Iran deal. I mean, it's like the Iran deal is actually a great example of something where, they ought to just be sort of owning up to the fact that this deal is no better than the deal that Obama had. I mean, in particular, you had people like Vance and Rubio, who both co-sponsored legislation as senators that argued that Iranians' frozen funds couldn't be released because the money, even if it had rules on it, could end up being used in a dangerous way. That was the position they took, and they co-sponsored legislation. And now they're trying to say, come on, man. Yeah. I mean, it's the level of the hypocrisy is what gets me. Again, like I'm okay with having debates about what the right thing to do is. I understand that the Iran situation is complicated. I am rooting for us to win. And yet the level of BS and hypocrisy coming from this administration and its allies, it is sort of connected to the politicization thing, because it's connected in the sense that it relates to trying to pretend that they're not doing something that they're doing. And that makes me nuts. Let's go to Jolly in New York. Jolly, how you doing? What do you got?
How you doing? It's Charlie. That's all right.
Charlie. Hey, Charlie.
It's okay. Just stuff with Fauci. Apparently it's because of what he testified before Congress about.
Correct.
Okay. And maybe I'm wrong, and, it's hard to tell with this administration, but every Supreme Court justice that Trump put up was asked about stare decisis. And they all were, precedent's precedent. They talked about super precedent. And yet, over the years, they've overturned precedent after precedent. So how is that any different about lying before Congress?
I'll tell you how it's different. Is in those cases, you can't prove that they lied. You can claim that they were deceptive. You can claim that they weren't forthcoming, but it wasn't a factual question as the questions were asked of Fauci. Now, the problem for those who want to assail Fauci is there is tons of ambiguity about some of these definitions. And you don't prosecute people when there's ambiguity. And in particular, like, of all the things with regard to Fauci, Fauci's responsible. It's like, if Fauci caused COVID-19, great, prosecute him. If there's a debate about what the definition of gain of function research is, that's nuts to be talking about it. But that's the point, is that you can't prosecute someone for a prediction or for analysis or for deception to some degree unless it's a lie. And I don't think you can prove that those Supreme Court justices lied about stare decisis, and I think that's the difference. Charlie, thank you. Mitchell's in New Jersey. Mitchell, how you doing? What do you got?
Hey, Jen, how are you?
Good.
I wanted to probe you a little bit on the why you felt the charges should not have been brought on the January 6th thing. Now, I personally thought the charges of the incitement to riot and along those ends were not all that strong, but I always thought that there was kind of a big cover up on the planning that was going on behind the scenes for changing for the fake electors, and that kind of plot to really do that state by state really should have been followed up on. And I'd like you to flesh that out a little bit if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So I think that there are two separate questions. Number one is, should Garland have prosecuted? And number two is, should Jack Smith have had the authority to do it on his own? On question one, the reason that I didn't think that Garland should bring the case is I thought it was in the best interest of the country and the justice system to basically say, yes, there was wrongdoing, but no, we're not going to bring a criminal case against the former president. That the standard has to be so high for the former president that we're not going to go there. Does that mean that there wasn't wrongdoing? No. Does that mean that they couldn't bring a case? No, because Jack Smith did present a pretty compelling case, but that was a separate issue, right? That was once Garland did exactly what he promised, which was to hand it over to a prosecutor where he wouldn't be making the calls. Jack Smith made the decision to prosecute. And I understand that decision. I'm not saying, oh my goodness, how could they have brought a case? I'm saying that I thought that it was in the best interest of the country not to do it. But it's a very different question from, was it a perfect call? And of course it wasn't. Of course he engaged in wrong. Of course he tried to overturn the election. But I think we'd actually be in a better place today as a country. And I think there'd be, I think that all of the prosecutions of Donald Trump also helped him enormously politically. So look, it's a kind of a nuanced answer, but you know, that's the way I view it. Let's go to Wisconsin and Mark. Mark, how you doing? What's going on?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. A couple of things. One, a while back you mentioned about how progressives don't listen to you because you're too much in the center, and I respectfully disagree because people would consider me pretty far left, I think, but I think you're great, and I really appreciate your integrity and your honesty, and I can listen to you, and I know that I'm going to get ideas about what's going on and not somebody trying to convince me of something. So that's really appreciated.
Thank you.
But with COVID, what's amazing to me is the fact we wasted all this time arguing about was it gain of function or was it natural. In fact, I think everybody would agree that if the Chinese leadership hadn't been so worried about hiding and covering up what was going on in Wuhan, we might have found out about what was going on in Wuhan and there wouldn't have been a pandemic. And yet we never talk about that. We argue about all this other stuff instead of really attacking this is what happens when we have a closed society. People don't find out what's going on, and you have a world pandemic. Because I don't think it would have had it if something like that happened here. Well, the news would have gotten out, and they would have had to clamp down on it.
And by the way, one of the problems is that even in investigating what happened, the Chinese were not being particularly forthcoming, which is what leads a lot of people to believe that a lab leak is more likely because they think the Chinese were trying to cover it up. I don't know. Again, I have always, found the idea as a layperson of it naturally migrating as being tough to believe, right? It's easier to understand the lab leak. I get that more. But I don't think that the scientists, and this is the majority of the scientific community who believe that, are doing it as some sort of cover up. I believe that they think based on their experience that that's the more likely assessment of what happened. But regardless, that doesn't make Fauci the villain in all this. That's the thing. When back in the day when this was front and center, I would ask concern, well, why do you think Fauci was out to I just think he wanted to cover his ass? What does that even mean? To cover his ass because he had overseen some research that was gain-of-function research that is dangerous, and even though it didn't cause the COVID-19 pandemic, could have, and so he wanted to lie about it so people wouldn't criticize him. It's like, come on. Jack is in Pennsylvania. Jack, how you doing? What do you got?
Hey, Dan, thanks so much for taking the call, and I really appreciate you touching on Tulsi Gabbard's release. And I come at it a different angle. I think that the gain-of-function research and the partnership that U.S. scientists had in Wuhan did create a lab leak, because I think primarily it was for vaccine research. And that's the thing they could not let you know.
Right? Because, Jack, I'm not one to tell you you're wrong. I don't know, right? I'm telling you, I think there is a real possibility that there was a lab leak. But to believe there's a lab leak is very different from saying, and therefore I believe that Anthony Fauci was involved in not just an international cover-up, but that he was advocating amongst the intelligence community, trying to get them to, to cover up for him because of this, is just, to me, just nuts.
Okay.
No, I'm agreeing with you on your fundamental point, which is you're saying you find it hard to believe it's anything other than a lab leak. I get that, right? I do. But
yeah, I don't think it was a wet market.
I get it. I said that a moment ago. It's a lot easier to understand for a layperson than it is the idea of somehow it moving from one thing to another, right? I get it. But that doesn't translate into Anthony Fauci's a criminal, to me.
He aided and abetted in the idea of the lab leak not being the case?
But what does that mean, aided and abetted? It's not a crime to believe it wasn't a lab leak. There are a lot of very well-intentioned people who disagree with you. And a lot of them have much more of a background in it than you do. The problem is there are people on the other side who also have a lot of experience, who believe, not as many in the science world, who believe it was a lab leak, but still enough to say there are questions. But aided and abetted, and that's not a crime to believe it wasn't a lab leak. And this is the problem. We've gone nuts on this stuff. And so, I understand your point that, you believe it just seems unreasonable for there to be any other interpretation. But when you actually go and read what these virologists write and exactly how they say it could have happened, it's not crazy. It's not ridiculous. It may be too eggheady, but it's not criminal. And I guess that's the bigger point for me. All right, I'll be curious what Mark from Texas has to say about this. Mark, how you doing? What do you got?
Good. How are you? Long-time listener, Dan, and I agree with the other fellow before that I like to listen to you because you're a straight shooter. So let's step back a second and look at the fact that the Obama administration had a pandemic team in place. Trump dismantled it. That was step one that went the wrong way. Now you take Fauci, and he's trying to do his job, but he's also, in a way, having to cover Trump's ass for the stupid stuff that he did. So the fact of the matter is, it happened, just like AIDS happened, just like the Spanish flu, just like all kinds of pandemics that happen to humans over the course of history. So my suggestion is this is all just the reason to avoid Iran, avoid an Epstein. And the rest is just gobbledygook. Thank you for taking my call.
Hey,
Have
Mark.
a great day.
Hey, Mark. Mark, are you bussing tables somewhere?
Am I what?
Are you bussing tables? It sounds like there's a bunch of dishes going on behind you.
No, I'm working out.
Oh, there we go. It's the clanking of weights.
Yes, weights.
Love it. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for calling in during your workout. Let's go to James in New York. James, what do you got?
Hey, Dan. You know what the big problem is here? That everybody thought after January 6th, Donald Trump was done. And we were also wrong. And now he's come back, and he has such a stranglehold on this party. And everybody, he learned the valuable lesson. The first administration, he hired people that were their own thinkers. And eventually, everyone in that original term, they all got fired or they quit. Now, he surrounded himself with yes people. They will do anything he wants. Even Tulsi Gabbard, who was essentially pushed out of that job, it's still doing something like this when it's so ridiculous. I watch Fauci every night during the height of COVID, and he was a force of nature. He was trying his very best, while Trump at every turn was spewing ridiculousness. I can't even imagine the amount of people that died in this country because they listened to Donald Trump. And now they're going after Fauci. That's the thing. If Donald Trump doesn't like you, eventually he will tell his cronies, get me something. Look, search, whatever you can do. And it's happening. And that's the real issue here, that Donald Trump has total control.
James, thank you. Let's go to Tori in Detroit. Tori, how you doing? What's going on?
Great. How are you, Dan?
Good, thanks. What do you got?
Good. I was just calling and listening to all of this. And my thought, too, is, blaming Fauci is ridiculous. But I think, Trump had information about COVID ahead of time as well. He downplayed it. He probably cost people their lives. So, it's just hypocritical, like he always is, for him to come back and want to blame something on somebody else. He had information as well ahead of time. He admitted that, but he downplayed it too. And he could have saved people's lives. So it's just the norm for him.
All right. Thank you. Dan in South Carolina. Dan, what's going on?
Hey, Dan, just from that previous caller, I mean, you had Nancy Pelosi eating at Chinese restaurants in January and February. So don't blame the delay on Trump, okay? That's just ridiculous and uninformed. My question to you today, why do you always feel it necessary to defend Anthony Fauci?
Because I'll tell you why. Because he may be wrong, right? I'm not saying Anthony Fauci's been right about everything. No, I've never said that. What I've said is that this idea of questioning Fauci's motives, that he was somehow creating this conspiratorial lie that was an effort to cover up the fact that he was directly or indirectly responsible for COVID, is so absurd. And I care about facts. Yeah, it is absurd. It is absurd. It's not absurd to say, well, we have a difference of agreement on what the definition of gain of function is, or we have a disagreement on whether he was referring to the intelligence community or intelligence briefings. Okay, I get it. But it is absurd to claim that Anthony Fauci was out to sort of hurt the country and that...
No one's claiming that.
Of course they are.
Claiming that, Dan. No, you know what? I don't think Fauci's a bad guy. I think he was trying to do something good for science. But you know what? Whatever happened, the Chinese got it and it leaked out. And Fauci, not just what was just released, there's been an assload of stuff that have indicated that Fauci talked people into changing their mind. Pressured them.
Wait, but no. But why is this pressuring as opposed to the typical advocacy that people in the scientific world do every day to try to say, here's what I believe and here's why? Why is that now criminal?
It's, you know what? I don't think it's criminal, but there were people that said
20 seconds
lab leak, and Fauci put pressure on them to change their mind.
Again, you keep saying put pressure. He tried to convince them that they were wrong.
10.
Fauci may have been wrong, but none of this is criminal, and none of this is what Tulsi Gabbard said it was. Dan, thank you for the call.